World War I is over. Women have the right to vote. Fashion took a liberal turn. Alcohol was outlawed. Jazz filled the air, and just about everybody that could afford it went to the movies. I'm Viola Fern, and this is the Roaring Twenties. I met with a man outside of the New York Supreme Court named Daniel Adler. He goes by Danny, and he's a young defense attorney that works with criminal law. I stopped him on the steps to ask him a few questions about the past decade.
Can I just get some quotes from you, Danny?
I'm a man of the law.
It was the most serious scandal I've ever studied, full of corruption and bribery. I mean, Albert Fall leased government-owned lands to private oil companies to drill in exchange for just personal enrichment. But in another serious case, there were two Italian men who murdered a shoe company's paymaster and guard, stealing more than $15,000. There was a car that the police checked out that was in connection with the murder that led to Sacco and Vanzetti's arrest. But what was weird is Sacco and Vanzetti didn't have any previous criminal records, and they denied everything. Oh, I studied this. Both boys were prosecuted July 1921, but that led to people going crazy for their release because they thought they were only being prosecuted for their immigration backgrounds. I mean, there were riots and bombings and all kinds of stuff, but in the end, both boys were electrocuted in 1925. America went from boom to bust and back, starting in the Roaring Twenties when things like credit came out, allowing Americans to buy now and pay later and take things like vacations. The boom didn't have a real increase in workers' wages, but by increasing of inequality and profits for the rich. Our government has been helpless and unwilling to intervene in the slow unfolding collapse in the economy and confined themselves to the capitalist cliche about the need to balance the government budget. The aftermath caused Americans to go into debt.
A rebellious-looking group of young ladies I met hanging outside of an ice cream parlor were scantily clad, smoking, and drinking milkshakes. I asked if I could interview each of them, but only Lola Baker was willing to be filmed.
Lots of reasons, actually. After us women got the right to vote, I just wanted to explore my own freedom. I couldn't call it rebelling. It's more like stepping out of my own box and finding out who I really am instead of a woman built out of society's rules. I've actually only been to 2 speakeasies in my life, and they are very organized secret bars that I'm probably not supposed to tell you about, but the ones that I went to require a password or a secret knock, and they are very cramped, and people are just dancing and there's drinking, and it's tons of fun. It's really liberating to be around so many new people since I grew up such a good girl. You heard of Al Capone? That big head gangster guy that scares the hell out of everyone? Yeah, that guy. I almost got in big trouble with him once. Well, it was more like his little guys that do all the dirty work for him. Happened in one of those speakeasies when I got threatened to shut my pretty little mouth for speaking my mind. Yeah, gangsters ain't that tough.
I drove to Harlem, where I was sure to find many aspiring young people. I was hoping to grab an interview with the courageous Charlotte Rosenberg, a famous female Jewish boxer. After all of her success, she still lives in the slums of Harlem with her family of 13, and I was lucky enough to catch her at the gym and ask her a few questions. There was so much inspiration around me in New York. I grew up in Harlem, and there was so much pride with people and race there. I just felt like I could do anything that I put my mind to. And so when the Harlem Renaissance kicked into place, I just followed my dream from then on. That was in about 1926. I've won about 38, lost 19 matches. And with the money I made boxing, I bought myself a nice Model T that everybody's been yapping about. Before I was living my dream when booze was outlawed, that 18th Amendment. 7 years back, I was in the slums of Harlem. My family was going through some tough times. My
parents weren't pulling in enough money, and you know, we have 6 brothers, 4 sisters, and me being the oldest, I had to find a way to get them all fed, at least. So I started begging, and I sold booze that came from Canada. You'd be surprised how far people would line up in front of me just to throw big bucks my way. So after that, my siblings had these big meals, and they were full every night, but those gangsters found out I was selling on their turf, and it was pretty much just like taking money out of their pockets. I'd get shot for doing it, so I had to stop just for my safety, and that was my other line of work.
Growing up, I didn't get much racism. My parents, who are immigrants from Palestine, they got more than me. But as I grew older, I started noticing the little things, the negativity towards my family. But when the 1920s came around, there were more members of that KKK. For some reason, the member count skyrocketed around that time, though most of them are down south, not in Harlem where I was, thank goodness. But I don't know what would have happened if all those members were near me. To further our information on the history we just learned, we'll start when Roosevelt entered office and started a series of new programs in the first 100 days. The first action as part of the New Deal, all banks closed so government officials could inspect the banks. Then 4 days later, 500 banks reopened and Americans felt they could trust the banks again with their money. The New Deal created millions of jobs and sponsored public works projects. Abuse of stock market was more clearly defined and monitored. The Social Security system was expanded, but in the end, the New Deal didn't work out. What really fixed the Great Depression was sharp reductions in spending, taxes, and regulation at the end of World War II.
Children, our most valuable natural resource.